Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Carolyn here, and today we're talking about food addiction help. So, what do we need to know about food addiction and what kind of help can you get? So, as you probably have read, food addiction is similar in some ways to addiction to drugs or alcohol, or even more importantly, to addiction to behaviors like we see with eating disorders. And it often begins as a way to manage stress or deal with issues in your life. Turn up the volume on pleasant emotions, even like happiness, or a way to find comfort, or even to numb yourself from uncomfortable emotions like anger or sadness or fear. Well, alcohol and drug addiction are very specific in that they center on an addiction to a substance. If you struggle with food addiction, this is what's more commonly called a behavioral addiction. In other words, you may be addicted to or dependent on certain behaviors rather than on the substance. Behavioral addictions there are many of them besides eating disorders, include things like sex addiction, gambling addiction, shopping addiction, and so on. And they can also involve restricting your food intake or binging. So either of these behaviors can be part of what you view as food addiction. Now, you may have difficulty stopping these behaviors, and you may also get a sort of a natural high by eating certain foods that maybe you feel you're addicted to. So whether it be chocolate or chicken even, or chips, whether your taste buds are craving salty foods or crunchy foods or sweet foods, which are very common. Those cravings work on the same part of the brain that drugs and alcohol work on, and that's the dopamine reward center. And I've talked about the dopamine reward center in many videos that are listed here. But just briefly, this is the part of the brain that gives us a sense of pleasure from both natural sources of pleasure, like playing with your kid, or watching a sunset, or having sex, or having a nice meal, etc. However, it's also involved in the addictive process when someone uses drugs or uses food in an addictive manner. It causes a spike of dopamine, which feels good, and then can lead to cravings when you're no longer eating that food. So since 2010, researchers at Yale University developed something called the Yale Food Addiction Scale in an attempt to identify people with food addiction. And they use the same criteria that we use to identify drug and alcohol addiction. So what they found is that 5 to 10% of the general population tests positive for food addiction symptoms, and 7% of children tested also positive for food addiction. The Yale Food Addiction Scale also shows that food addiction is 15 to 20% higher in those who are living in larger bodies. Even higher rates of food addiction, though, are found in those who are seeking bariatric surgery or weight loss surgery, or in people living in larger bodies who also have binge eating disorder. Now, binge eating disorder does share some characteristics with food addiction, but there are also some differences. So 57% of people who've been diagnosed with binge eating disorder also meet criteria for food addiction. There is some overlap there. In both disorders, people experience a lack of control over their eating and continued overeating despite consequences, and also a difficulty in changing their behaviors. Now, those who scored positive on the Yale Food Addiction Scale tended to get more of their calories from fat and protein rather than from carbohydrates as compared to those without food addiction. They were also more likely to have a history of childhood physical or sexual abuse. Now, if you are using food to deal with either positive emotions or negative emotions, or if food is your go-to for comfort or a way of coping with stress, then it is the way in which you use food that makes it addictive, not per se the food itself. Obviously, the food manufacturers put a lot of things in our food to make them palatable and highly palatable, and those are things like sugar and fat and salt. However, just like not everybody who drinks alcohol has an alcohol use disorder, not everybody who uses, eats sugar becomes a food addict. So if you focus only on eliminating the food that you feel is addictive, then it's not really going to fix the problem. So you'll miss out on that deeper level of recovery that I'm always talking about. This deeper form could be termed a journey to discovery, because so many people with addictions have never really known who they are in their essence. They've never really known their authentic selves. So more than any medical risk, food addiction is really psychologically debilitating. Thoughts about food, thoughts about eating, thoughts about your size or weight can take over your life and make you feel really isolated and hopeless and unhappy. And your food obsessions may cause low self-esteem, anxiety, or panic attacks. You may feel sad, irritable, or emotionally detached or numb. Sometimes this can even affect your work performance, and you may feel isolated from friends and family because you don't want them to find out about your food addiction. People with food addiction often avoid social events because of embarrassment about their eating behaviors. It's really important to heal from food addiction to enable yourself to get back to the life you want and deserve. So if you're interested in learning more about food addiction, there are some resources in the show notes for this video that will help you. And we have an anchor program, which is a 12-week non-diet program for food addiction, binge eating, and emotional eating, which is starting soon. And there's a link to that program in the show notes. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Feel free to email me or contact me through the website if you have further questions, or if you'd like to access the free consult that I'm happy to make available to you. Just want to pat myself on the back a little bit, do a little humble brag that we were selected as #1 in the top 5 food addiction podcasts to follow in 2020 by FeedSpot. So you can also tap into my podcast at carolynrossmd.com/podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so you can get notified when the next video is posted. Thank you for listening.